So, without any further ado, can you all please show your appreciation for Mr. Ben Aaronovitch?
Thank you. I was also to start telling jokes when I did it. Hello.
Two authors going to a bookshop. So basically, the way it's going to play out tonight, we're going to have a conversation, see how that pans out. Then we're going to open it to the audience for questions, and then we're going to be signing some stuff here. In October, we were here to celebrate 10 years of Rivers of London. We're now here to celebrate 11 years of Rivers of London. And,
yeah, pretty much. There was the anniversary, I think it was yesterday or something.
Yeah.
I've lost track.
Yeah. I just want to run through some stats, because in those 10 years, you've written 9 novels, 3 novellas, 9 comic book series, a short story anthology. Many of these...
It's not an anthology if it's all your own work.
Fair enough.
I've just had that drummed into me every time I called it an anthology.
Collection.
Yes.
Many of these have been Sunday Times bestsellers. You've been nominated for all sorts of awards.
No, I haven't.
Look, this is off your bloody agent's website, so...
I know, but that's all puff. I've been almost no awards whatsoever. It's the bane of my life. I have my agent, one of the fellow agent, my fellow, what do you call it? Stablemate at my agent, right, is Lavi Tidar, who's just won about everything. Yeah. Like, there hasn't been a science fiction award he has not won. And we trade insults every Christmas. We go for lunch and we trade insults. He goes, give me your money, and I go, give me your awards. My agent just sits there smiling gently to himself.
Basically, I used to work at Ben's publisher, Orion Books, when he was published, and I remember the excitement of the first book going out. And in particular, we were talking about this backstage. It was when one of the publicists, who runs screaming from any form of genres, kind of science fiction or fantasy, and she sent an email around the company saying, Ben Aaronovitch, where have you been all my life? This is brilliant. And it made us realise we had something really extraordinary, really, really fun and entertaining, but insightful, and it was the beginning of something great.
Didn't tell me, by the way. They made sure I thought I was like, your standard starting beginning author.
Well, you were working at Waterstones Covent Garden at the time.
Yeah, I was still working there at the time when it came out. It was brilliant.
I mean, you had already had a career as a writer. You'd written some Doctor Who TV series.
Yes. Doctor Who TV series. It's so grand.
Well, it is. I mean, they are regarded as some of the best of that era.
Of that era, yes.
You'd written some Target novelizations, some new adventures. You worked on TV shows like Jupiter Moon. But there you were, stacking shelves in a Waterstones.
Yeah.
What spurred on Rivers of London? Was it, I've got to stop stacking books in a Waterstones?
Basically. It was a number of things. I finally realised about 5-6 years after my last credit that I probably was never going to get employed as a TV writer again. Right. This is before because now there's like 8. You can sell stuff to like loads of different people. There's loads of different people financing. But in those days, it was basically ITV and BBC, and I happen to know that the head of BBC Drama hated me, and so therefore I didn't like him either. We didn't like each other. So actually, I don't think he hated me. I think I was too insignificant for him to hate. I think I was just sort of like distaste would probably be a better word. So I thought, well, that's it really. You're just going to give up. You might. And then I was shelving books. I was in Waterstones shelving books in my section. I ran science fiction and crime. And I noticed that I was shelving books by people who hadn't been shelving in the beginning of the year. And I thought, all these people have been published since I started working here. Therefore, it must be really easy to get published. Because, one of the things you have to understand about being a writer is one of the prime qualifications of being a writer is you must be amazingly arrogant. Okay, if you think about it, you're going to write 90,000 words on the basis that other people are going to want to read them. Right? And you're doing it on the basis of what? Maybe like some essays you wrote when you were at school. Okay. The longest thing I wrote before I wrote my first the Doctor Who thing was like 6,000 words. I thought, oh God, it's a lot of words. 6,000 words. And then you write like 44,000 words that you hope other people will want to read. And especially when you start, because you are the greatest thing ever. Yes. And so you have to be incredibly arrogant. So I thought, right, I shall write prose. And that's where the impulse came from. Plus I was going bankrupt. And I had no other talent. So it's like either I made the writing pay or it was the workhouse for me. So
where did you find time to write during the day job?
Well,
not during the day job. It wasn't.
Waterstones is usually 10 to 6 or 11 till 7. So what I used to do is, unfortunately, my son at the time, who was just becoming a teenager, refused to be a proper teenager. And would wake up at about 7 o'clock in the morning and start talking to me. So I was waiting for that point where he would lie in bed until I kicked him out to go to school. But nope, never happened. Although he did paint his bedroom black. And so and he was getting up early, and I was like getting up early in the morning to write, and he was getting up earlier so he could talk to me. Right? In the end, I was getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Right, 4 o'clock in the morning to get like 2 hours of writing in. And you get very strange. So I read Rivers of London. I go, I wrote that at 3:30. I can tell. That was 3:30 in the morning. I wrote that bloody line because there's no way I would have written that line if I had been awake. and so now it killed me because before that I'd been one of those people that worked like late. But now I'm one of those people that wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning and writes, especially in the summer when it gets light. I'm like, oh great, it's light. I can write. That way you can get a good couple of hours of procrastination in
before the emails,
before breakfast.
Right. This brings me on to this. We're 10 years on. You said you can still remember writing certain lines, certain parts of it, and this is a fantastic edition. It's got line illustrations, beautiful maps in there. It's all lots of new stuff.
Also available as merch. He said quickly.
10 years on, is there anything you would want to go back and change?
I did actually I removed a couple of jokes, right, because they weren't funny. Right? Because you can get away with anything if it's funny, but if it's not funny, it's just not funny. And I'm not going to say which ones, by the way. So you're going to have to do a text line by line analysis. And I suggest you buy 3 copies. If you can. So I took out a couple of jokes. One because no one got it, and the other one is because it was a bit inappropriate. One, no one got it because they didn't remember not the 9 o'clock news. Obviously didn't find that as funny as I had, and one because I'd really watched too much of The Emperor's New Groove, and I was looking for a description of someone in the middle of the night, and it just latched onto this thing, and it really didn't really work. So I thought I'd just take those out. But you can't do too much fiddling with your work, because otherwise you just do it all day.
Well, this isn't a George Lucas special edition.
No. We fixed some of the typos.
Right.
Inexplicably crept in through the production process. Also, I can't spell, and I'm slightly dyslexic. I think so is my copy editor.
You mentioned Emperor's New Groove, which is a first time I've heard that as an influence on anyone's writing.
You're kidding me, right?
It's a great film.
Huge
It's
influence.
a great film. You've also mentioned things like Rent-A-Ghost. What other things were sort of going into the mix here?
Yes, Rent-A-Ghost. Well, I like Rent-A-Ghost. Rent-A-Ghost is, I think, needs some explanation. Who actually remembers Rent-A-Ghost? Wow. Okay, we've got pensioners in today. I mean, apart from the fact that if I was to sing the theme song, you'd have it stuck in your head for the rest of the day. But the Rent-A-Ghost was like a thing because you had these ghosts, but they were treated like absolutely normal. Like you had this extraordinary thing of dead people, and they were just renting them out. There was a business where they rented out the ghosts, and that's like, if you think about Rivers of London, that's what I was basically aiming for. I was aiming for the idea that there's magic, and then you have to have policemen dealing with the magic, in a kind of very boring kind of administrative way. Like, oh, I'm sorry, that's a violation of, 1973. Well, at least it is with Peter. He does it that way. I think that's just...
And then you got books like Roof World by Christopher Fowler.
Yes, Roof World, which annoys Christopher Fowler no end. I don't think he likes Roof World. I think it's really brilliant, but I don't think he likes it. All people like Ursula K. Le Guin, Riz the Diversity. I was one of those kids. I discovered science fiction when I was about 10. And I just voraciously read every single book I could find. This is back before YA existed.
Yeah.
So you start in the children's section of your library, and then you just work into the adult section of your library. So you end up on adult science fiction within about 3 books of starting on the science fiction section. And I just read everything that was vaguely science fictional or fantasy. And I had no taste. It was completely indiscriminate. Yum, 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 yum. All of those books are influences.
Yeah.
But I can't remember which ones specific influences, but they were just, And I sit there going, wow, I had no taste whatsoever, because I've picked up a couple of those, and they are amazingly badly written. Some of them. And dreadful, like politically dreadful. God, the 1970s.
It was a different time.
It was a different time.
Funny enough, I'm rereading Stainless Steel Rat books. Which
yes, the gender politics in that is always a fun thing.
But they really get to the point. They do not muck about.
No, well, that's that. You've got to remember, people had to type in those days.
Yes.
So there was none of this fucking about with with a word processor. You got what you got, so you kind of oh god, I'm not going to change that. It's fine. But books were small. I mean, I've got books. They were like, you would go out and you get a book for 5p, and it was that thick, and it was 60 to 70,000 words long. That's considered a long novel.
Yeah, well, I was looking up the word count. They're 56, 60, 65,000 words long.
Yeah, fucking lucky bastards.
Yeah,
they can get away with 60,000 words. Yeah. I can't get away with 60,000 words. They call it a novella.
Let's not get started on word count. 10 years on, did you have any clue at the time that it would become the behemoth that it is? Comic books.
No. I wasn't even planning to give up my day job. I was going to stay at Waterstones, and I was going to use the advance to stave off bankruptcy and pay my mortgage. Right?
Yeah.
That's what my plan was. I was going to be a mid-list author. I was all ready to be a mid-list author. I even had a strategic marketing plan, the kind of strategic marketing plan you have to have when you're a mid-list author, because when you're a mid-list author, no one gives you any publicity whatsoever. You have to do it all yourself. Yep. And I came up with this great scheme, right? This great scheme for the first week, because I knew how Waterstones worked in those days. You see, in those days, they would look for book spikes in a branch or in a pod. They had pods in those days for some reason. And what I tried to do is I tried to engineer a book spike of my book in the pod, so that it would show up at the next book seller buying collective meeting of the regional managers or whatever they were called at that time. I think they were pod managers or something. Wales, maybe. That was a different time. We were being run by a guy from Tesco's then. So, and so I gave, instead of stupidly giving my book to my family, who so they could just put it on their shelf somewhere and never read it, I gave them all Waterstones cards with specific instructions of which branches to go into and the time window for them to buy it. Yeah. In the hope that I could create one of these Waterstones, like a spike, right? And for all I know, it might have worked, right? Except then I go on the Simon Mayo show, and I go in at something like 7,000 in Waterstone, on Amazon, 7,000 books, 7,000, and during the course of the interview, we come out and I'm at like 37, and I'm like. Well, I remember me and John Weir, who was my publicist, going. So we were, and then I made it into the top 10, and I was like, we made it into the top 10. Everyone's running around going, ah. See, now the way you know you're successful in publishing is the restaurants they take you to. Right? So when I started, I got taken to we went to Chinatown, and we had a very nice Chinese meal. I'm not going to turn up my nose at a nice Chinese meal in Chinatown. And this is because Chinatown was just across the road from the Orion building where we were. And then I noticed that I was going to more and more expensive restaurants. I mean, I was going it was Jamie's Italian, which was a big thing in those days for me, Jamie's Italian. And, and then I had to tell them to stop because we were going to those kind of restaurants where you get drizzles. I don't like that. Medallions of things with drizzles. And the thing that I really hate is those ice cream scoops of mashed swede, which are exactly what I was fed as a child at school. I'm sitting there looking at this going, why are you feeding me school dinners? Can't we go to Carluccio's? So I came to regret. They're quite pleased to do that because it made me cheaper as a kind of like bribe thing. But no, it was very noticeable that over the coming years, the restaurants got more and more expensive as the book sales went up.
As you said, this was, the Simon Mayo thing was transformative. It really changed things. Did that put any pressure on you with the second book?
Yes. They wanted it now, please. No, it didn't actually, because I'd already finished the second book by the time the first book came out.
Right.
Because the second book only came out like 2 months later.
Did you really?
Yeah. I think it was like February, and then it was something like March. I think it was a ridiculously short period. Yeah, because you've got to understand, you're a bookseller. If you're going to sell a series, you want 2 books on the shelf.
That's what I've done this year, by the way. My books are here.
I knew that as a bookseller. I mean, that was part of my marketing strategy.
Yeah.
Get as many books with your name on the shelf, because I knew for a fact that a single book can just disappear into the understock. Right? They don't have understock anymore. In those days, you could disappear into the understock and never emerge again onto the shelf. But if you have 3, then the bookseller will go, oh, this is 1, 2, 3, this must be important. And then they will make sure that they keep all 3 books. Yeah. And you're taking up more shelf space, you see. It's all about shelf space. That's why books have suddenly got fat and bloated. That's why you have B format paperbacks, which I bloody hate as a bookseller. I bloody hate B format paperbacks. But, so I forgot what I was talking about.
The book 2 coming out really quickly.
Yeah, so book 2 came out really quickly. Book 3 was the one where it was like, when's it coming? And I was late. And they go, but Waterstones have built their summer schedule around you. Well, no one bloody told me that Waterstones was building. I might have mentioned this at some point. So I was like, oh no. And that was really late. God. And I've been slow ever since. I mean, I'm such a slow writer. It just really annoys me. Every time I get the speed up, it's like I've got graphs and it goes, no. Like I'm watching an engine turn over on a cold day. It really is.
You often on Twitter, you put up your sort of, well, you're doing weekly word count.
I do. I used to do it every day, but it was too depressing. I do it weekly. Get it all over the way.
So is it still the early morning routine for you still?
Yes, I still get up early in the morning, but now I get dragged around the heath by my trainer, so I have to do that first. Yeah, she makes me go up hills, walk briskly. It's terrible.
Now, when
privatise my willpower, basically. It's like I could possibly go for a walk myself, but no, I can't make myself do it. So she comes around and goes, "Get the fuck up there." She's 70, by the way. My trainer. I'm not kidding. She really is. I live in fear that she's going to die.
Keeping it on track.
During a walk.
All these years later, all the comic books and short stories and what. How are you keeping track of everything?
Spreadsheets.
Really?
Yeah, no. Well, I have a whiteboard, a spreadsheet, and a PA.
Okay.
And in between those 3, I can keep track of about 70% of what I'm doing.
Okay.
So I'm very micro-focused. So when I'm working on a book, I have to work on one book at a time. I tried working on one book and a comic at the same time. No. Write the book, write the comic, write the book, write the comic, write the short story. I have to do it like that, dun, 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 dun. And I get very micro-focused, and then basically I have a part-time PA who basically phones me up and goes, "Your guys are Canterbury tomorrow, remember?" Am I? Yes, you are. Okay.
Does it slow you down at all? You're writing, you'll come to a character and you'll think, hang on, what was the last thing we saw them in? What's the colour of their eyes?
I have a long list. Also, my fans on the internet have quite friendlily created lists of characters that I sometimes use. I do double check it just to make sure they slip one in that I didn't actually write. But I don't remember anyone called Algernon. So the fanon doesn't creep into the books. No, I have a thing called the crude list, which is basically every time I write a character, I go through the book at the end and I put their description. So if I think they're coming back, obviously I don't do it if they're not coming back. so that their eye color doesn't change from book to book. But even then, you just forget. You just forget, and you go, it's quite easy with the Rivers because they've all got really brown eyes, so you don't have to worry about remembering what eye color they've got. But you just do these things. It's consistency. So I've got a mad copy editor who's wonderful. He just gives me like 5 or 6 pages of notes on the notes, which is just brilliant. I keep them. I mean, he does real research. Like when you have like bits of French or German, he will go and look them up and double check the French. He'll double check the German. He will double check the train timetable. You sit there going, it's great. I just make shit up and he just checks it, and then I use his stuff. Win-win.
You mentioned readers, so let's talk about these people here.
Hello. Thank you for buying my books.
Because
you made me a very happy person.
You're writing for books that go in the science fiction and fantasy section.
Not anymore.
Well,
I'm being moved out.
Are you?
Yeah, apparently. Because
you get your own drop, is that it?
No, what it is, science fiction people like me, right? Our books buying process is very simple. We walk into our local branch of Waterstones and we go straight for the science fiction section, right, to see if there's anything we haven't bought yet, which is usually not. We've usually bought everything we want to buy off the science fiction, but you never know. Something might have arrived unexpectedly, surreptitiously, or you might catch a cover that you like, and then we sort of spiral out from the science fiction section into general fiction and crime and other sections, right? General fiction readers will not go near the science fiction section at all. Right, they will avoid it. I ran a science fiction section. It was there. Right, there was the science fiction section. There was the well into the downstairs where the stairwell went, and there was a way you could get to Misery Memoirs that way, or you could get to the Misery Memoirs the long way, and you would see people go see the science fiction section and go the long way. In case, I don't know what they were worried was going to happen as they went past the science fiction section. But they just avoided it. It was like wow. I actually wrote a little essay for my manager to explain how that worked because it was just hilarious to me. And the thing is that no one expected my books to have a wide general audience. See, I didn't expect it. You guys didn't expect it. No, nobody expected it. So we rely on the show. We become very reliant on the tables, which means we live at the whim of Waterstones, basically, whether they put me on a table or not. And really, the thing is that the science fiction it's just a calculation that the science fiction readers will go and look at the general fiction section, and also they're much more tech savvy. Yeah. So they will look it up, most of the time. And whereas general readers, we feel like we're missing people who might have just picked it up off general fiction who didn't see it. Because we're greedy that way. Yeah, we want more sales.
I feel the hand of your agent here.
Well, my agent is like, wow, he's been saying this for like 5 years now. But it was me that came up with the argument about the science fiction section because I remember it as a phenomenon, Yeah. And I don't mind, but I've noticed that science fiction sections have started disappearing round corners now, right? And have ended up in sort of like, not every shop, obviously, but in a lot of shops, a lot of bookshops, not just Waterstones, they tend to end up down by Mind, Body and Spirit. So it goes The Alchemist, and then you have the science fiction section. In fact, the manga section is now more prominent usually than the science fiction section.
Well, when did you first realise that you weren't just getting the science fiction readers, you were getting...
About a week into... I'd given a copy of a book to a friend, and I went round, well, you want to know what they think, obviously. So I said, well, are you enjoying the book? And he says, I don't know. My mother stole it and she won't give it back. And I was like, your mother? We're talking Doris Lessing, reader here. Not I suppose that was a bit of a giveaway, Doris Lessing, though. Maybe Margaret Atwood. And I was like, why is she reading it? Oh, she really likes it. She keeps going on about it, but she won't give me the book back. And I was like, okay. Have another book. And that's when I thought, this is not selling. And I got this kind of, but you really don't know what's going on. When you're an author, you really don't know what's going on with your books at all, because they don't tell you. Right? Especially the French publishers. If you ever looked at a French publisher's output, they don't even use French. They use like words that are not even translatable into French. and you can't read them. You just cannot tell how many books you're selling at all. And when you phone up, you go, how many books do I sell? They go, what? Is it selling well? But British publishers have got better, but they used to be really crap. They've got a lot better actually in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But it used to be like, am I selling? Don't know. Why do you care? We gave you the money. Well, at some point I'm going to get royalties, not for ages. Because you don't get money. Once you get the advance, they're very careful to take that advance back before you get any more money out of the book, right? So you have to sell out what they call earn out. Now, earning out is what the word your agent wants to hear, right? And I earned out on 3 books on the first book in hardback, which was the first indication that I was making lots of money. But my advance wasn't very high. But they won't tell you this. You find out, 6 months later. So it's not like you're getting like bulletins from them saying you're selling really well, great. They're just
Well, that's because I used to when I worked at Orion, I looked after various accounts, but one of them was Amazon. I used to do a weekly report every Monday with everyone's sales, so they weren't passing that on.
No.
Bloody hell, that took me an hour.
No. Oh, they're probably passing them on to other people in the business. Like they're probably passing them on to Katie or whoever was in Katie's job at the time. But they weren't passing them on. They don't pass them on to author. Well, you've got to remember, at that stage of your career, you are the lowest form of life. You are slightly less important than the people that deliver the coffee, right? Because they'd miss the people who deliver the coffee if they don't deliver the coffee. Whereas as an author, they don't really want you to be around and deliver a book, go away. That's basically the author's job. And then at a certain point, you become what they call a tentpole author.
Yeah.
Right. And really, at that point, it goes from sort of you working for the publisher to the publisher sort of working for you.
Yeah.
But they don't tell you because they know as soon as you find that out, work that one out, you'll be going, yes, and I want my name bigger.
Yeah.
Because they know we're vain as all shit. So they I want my name in the trouble with my name, of course, you can't really make it much bigger. And without sort of splitting it in half with a hyphen, which just looks weird. Like Aaronovitch. People will go around, Mr. Aaron. Mr. Ovitch.
Do you remember the first time you had one of those meetings? Because the other term we use in publishing is you're a brand author.
Yeah, that's when you become a brand author.
And what happens when you're a brand author? You get called into the boardroom. We do a presentation for you, and we have really good Marks and Spencer's biscuits.
Excellent Marks and Spencer's biscuits, which
Yeah.
I always eat all of them before anyone else can get a chance.
Yeah, free biscuits.
They always look really horrified. It's like, I get nervous when I eat biscuits.
We're going back to your readers. How, as you've discovered who your readers are,
I don't know who my readers are. I know who the ones that come to events are. Very nice to meet you all. I know the people who post on the internet, right? But there must be more of them, otherwise I wouldn't be earning so much money.
What?
So I have really no idea. I do sometimes wonder who they all are. The quiet ones,
Yeah.
Are they sinister quiet ones?
But has your relationship with your readers changed? Are you sort of 10 years on, are you thinking they're going to like this, or do you ever get to the point where you're second guessing yourself?
I try not to. To a certain extent, it's always inevitable that you're going to be thinking, is this any good? Is it going to like the last one? They really like the last one. Are they going to like this one? But you can't do that. But I have pointed out that we're incredibly arrogant, right, writers as a breed. So, you can usually overcome that. It's there's something. For example, who's not read past Broken Homes? Fine, good, I can spoil it then. Right? Right, the whole thing with Broken Homes, right? I knew, right, that was going to happen around the middle part of book 1. I'd figured out that was going to happen. It's about the only thing I did know was going to happen was that was going to happen in Broken Homes, right? I knew 2 things about that Peter was going to jump off a tower block when it was being demolished, and he was going to be betrayed, right? And those are the 2 things I knew. And when I got to the Broken Homes, I put the book out and I thought to myself, this is going to cause shitstorm, right? So I sat watching Twitter on publication day, waiting for it. And you don't get to do that very often. That was brilliant. You don't get to pull a whammy on your audience, It's not because you can try, but it usually goes horribly wrong. But that was like a lovely natural kind of wham event, what they call a wham episode, right? And that was great, and that's the really satisfying. So in that way, I do interact, but I try not to worry is not the right word. You can only do one thing. You can only write the book you want to write, and then hope that other people will read it. This is my big wisdom for writers, by the way. Write the book you want to write, and then just hope like crazy other people want to write it. Worked for me so far. And people, people like books. You can't second guess them. You can't hit the zeitgeist. You will miss unless you're Richard Osman, obviously. In which case you can bloody go, oh look, there's the zeitgeist. I shall hit it right in the bullseye there, and sell millions of books. Thank God he hasn't got one coming out when I've got one coming out. That's all I'm going to say.
We're going to open it up to questions in a minute, but before we do, I want to ask about the new novel, which is coming in April.
Yay!
The title is Amongst Our Weapons, which immediately made me think of the Spanish Inquisition sketch. So is it,
yes, that's where the title comes from.
Surprise and fear and a ruthless efficiency?
Yes.
So
my shiny red uniform.
I'll come in again. What can you tell us about that?
Well,
are there any wham moments?
Well, I'm not going to say. Because you can't telegraph a wham moment, otherwise it's not a wham moment, is it?
Does it have one in there?
I wouldn't say so, but I don't know. You see, I don't know what will be a wham moment for one reader. I mean, I know it was wham moments for me. It was when I finished it, I went, thank God that's done with. But I think that with every book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, it's not so much a wham moment. I think Beverly and the twins will be a moment. And, I worked very hard on that with a lot of advisors, mainly my female relatives, all telling me what it was like. Because I'd forgotten. I mean, not that I ever did it, but I mean, I actually was present for a birth once. And all I remember is it took a really long time, and I'm glad I wasn't doing it. That's what I remember. And I thought, oh, God, if I was a woman, I would never do that twice. There's just no way I would do that twice. I spent a lot of time in that, but that's not really the plot. That's kind of like what happens as well as the plot. I think there's some surprises. There'll be some. I hope there's some stuff for people who just started the book, right? Who don't know anything about the past, and I hope for the people that do read the books, have read all the books and keep them in mind, because you get lots of different types of readers, right? You get readers who have read all the books, can't remember a bloody thing about any of them, right? It was last year, for Christ's sake, that I read the last book. Well, I'm supposed to remember everyone's names. I mean, that's me, by the way, when I'm reading a book. Okay, Wikipedia is your friend, by the way, for that. And then there's people who have read it and there's just people out there with brains that retain information and they just remember all the main characters. And I hope that I've managed to satisfy everyone. That my aim is really that everyone has a good time. This is my aim. Everyone reads a book, and the people that are really detail orientated and love all the characters and want to hear more about the characters, they are satisfied. And the people who have no fucking idea who anyone is, they're satisfied, or at least not totally baffled. And the people who are in between, everyone in between is satisfied. And the people that like certain characters get a bit of fun for the character. But you have to be careful, because I was halfway through book 4 when I realised what had happened to book 4 of J.K. Rowling's. Right? And I realised that what it was is that she'd fallen in love with all the minor characters, and then she had to keep coming up with storylines so that she could have all these minor characters could have proper story, rather than coming in and going, hello, I'm a minor character, and going out again. She had to come up with storylines, and you do that, you end up with a book that thick that can be used, in lieu of breeze blocks, really, for building things. And I wanted to avoid that. So sometimes my minor characters kind of disappear, or they only make little cameos, and sometimes they come back for long things. And sometimes you want to make room for new characters, and some of my new characters were demanding more time,
right? Because
they're a demanding bunch. So my main thing is that people will enjoy it. If people enjoy it and obviously buy it, obviously very important. I like to stress that fact, by the way, especially to people in bookshops. I forgot what I was talking about now.
A good time.
I want people to have a good time. I mean, I don't really aim. I like to feel I'm profound in some ways, but I don't aim to be profound, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to change the world, but I like to feel that I say some stuff, and I invoke some wisdom, and I get some laughs, get some yucks. And that's all I really hope for. That's what I will look for in a book, and I'm hoping that I'm delivering that in a book. But in the end, you know, you guys are going to decide whether you like it or not, and we'll know because the sales are going. And you know, the meals will get worse, and they'll stop sending me wine, and I'll go, you know, slow decline into obscurity. Sad but true. Until the TV series.
There might be a question about it. Let's open it up to questions. Depending on where you're sat, I might repeat the question if you're at the back and someone at the front or whatever. So, one already. There we go.
How much time and what's your process for plotting each book?
I wish I had a process for plotting the books. Well, I have friends who write really long, well, not as long as your one, outlines, right? And I have friends that start on page 1 and go, chapter 1, and they think, I wonder what this book is about, and then they just start. I'm in between those two. So I usually have an idea of tone. I usually have more tone and feelings, and usually a couple of scenes I'd like to see. And then I start to develop a sort of plot, and then I usually lose track of the plot. And then I usually stall about the halfway mark until I work out what happens in the second half of the book. And then what happens is you get to a point where you're going downhill. It's like you're going downhill, and suddenly the book is going, and you're kind of worrying that you're not going to have enough words to get the plot out. And then you give it to your editor, and they go, why is this book really short at the end? And you go, well, I'm not rewriting it, so it's tough. Excuse me right now. So I don't really have that. And books vary. Like some books I know what's going to happen all the way through. Some books I don't. For example, Rivers of London, I knew there was a murder. I knew it was in Covent Garden. And I had that opening scene, and that was it, right? Then I went to Covent Garden, I looked, and I found that it was where the first performance of Punch had taken place. And a little light went ding, but then I had to work out why Punch was killing people in Covent Garden. And I really didn't get to that until about halfway through the book. And I suddenly went, oh! But, you know, and then I realised that the halfway point of the book would be when they figure out it's Punch, right? When they figure out it's following the plot of Punch. And then after that, it was like, what happened next? And that was when I realised that what was going to happen to Leslie had happened to Leslie. And then we were going to have a denouement. And originally, you see, for example, this is a very good example. Originally, the riot was going to take place in Cambridge Circus, having broken out during a performance of Matrix the Musical in the Cambridge Theatre. Right? But the more research I did, the more it kept on coming back to the Royal Opera House, because Macklin had a seat there because of the old Prices riots and all the other things that had happened in the Royal Opera House. You know, on Bow Street and generally just the Bow Street Runners and all that kind of stuff. So in the end, that's what happened. And then you have to think, well, what kind of opera is it? I need an opera where someone got hung. So it has to be an opera, I can't remember, it's Peer Gynt or whatever it is, where the guy gets Billy Budd, right? And then I had to go and find a performance of Billy Budd. Once you find the performance, then, and all these things feed into the process. It's sort of what they call it is an iterative process, where you go backwards and round, kind of, and each iteration kind of like builds on the other iteration. And then some books like Moon Over Soho, I only had a title. I just knew it was called Moon Over Soho because it's such a cool title. It's from Threepenny Opera. It's one of the tracks from the Threepenny Opera. And I thought, well, it's in Soho. And for a second I thought, werewolves, moon. I thought it was a bit obvious. And then I thought jazz, and then blah blah yada yada yada, and it just starts with someone dying of jazz, basically. and this is, then it went on, and then I developed the whole thing, and then I found out about the Café de Paris. Once you find out about what happened at the Café de Paris, you can't ignore what happened at the Café de Paris. So that becomes an integral part of the story. Whispers Underground, I decided I wanted to do something underground, did a lot of research about the underground, a lot of which never made it into the book, because there's so much fucking underground, right? I mean, amazingly, there was a whole 2 more chapters of them running around underground, right? And I got to the bit where they were about to go onto the mail rail, right? Which I never put in. Did tons of research on the mail rail. And Agent Reynolds went, how much fucking underground does this city have, right? And I thought, this is too much. I think we've exhausted the possibility of the sewers now. So that was. So you have that. Broken Homes, I absolutely knew what was going to happen at the end, right? I had no idea what happened in the middle, but I knew what was going to happen at the end, right? Foxglove Summer, I knew it was going to be fairies, but I didn't know how. I knew it was going to be a missing, 2 kids missing. I knew it was going to be 2 kids missing. I knew it was going to be Peter was going to be up there looking into the kids. It's it's the classic take the boy out of the city, take him out of his comfort zone, put him out. I didn't know Beverly was going to turn up until she turned up. And then the next thing I know, they're having sex in a river. And I'm like, fuck me, when did that happen? And then why are they having sex in a river? And then suddenly I've got bloody the lug, right? It's Baby Lug, which comes up in a short story, by the way. Available in all good email catalogues. And so, you never know. You never know. I never really know where a book is going. I knew with this one, I thought it was going to be much more Golders Green. I wanted to go to Beavis Marks, but the lockdown meant I couldn't do a lot of the research that I wanted to do. So I couldn't get into Beavis Marks. Beavis Marks was locked down and everything. So a lot of the stuff that I wanted to put in there went, and I ended up in Manchester. Reasons best known only to the Manchester, really, and Glossop of all places. And then, of course, if you're going back to Glossop, you have to take Glossop's favourite son, Alexander Sewell, with you. And then and that starts. I started doing research on Glossop. I went up to Glossop, wandered around, had a look at it, found some interesting places that just lent themselves to stories, and that feeds into the story. So there's a whole sequence in Glossop that just appeared because I went to Glossop and saw what was there to see, and that's why I always try to go to places, because you never really know what a place is like until you've gone there. I mean, I draw the line at some places. Like I never went into the sewers. Right, I'm far too large. So no, I'm not even sure I can get down a manhole. Right, so I didn't go down the sewers, and I don't go into morgues and stuff. I'm not like Linda LaPlante, who would talk her way into like the Russian morgue in Moscow, Central Morgue, which would be surrounded by describes her. God no, God. But I got into Westminster Morgue. I finally got I didn't talk. I was invited because it turned out the coroner was a fan. Got invited to actually see what the Ian West Memorial Forensic Suite is like. So the description in this book is the most accurate description of the Ian West Memorial Forensic Suite you will ever see in a book, because I actually went and saw it and they actually showed me around, and it's not at all like what you imagine it will be, at all, in any way. But I particularly like, right, and I really wanted to put this in, and I never got to put it in. They basically post corpses in through the front door at night because it's closed. It's like follows office hours. So Keaton's and Company, which is the company that's contracted to take bodies from crime scenes, right, or hospitals, they come along and they have like this. They have a key and they open up one of these flaps and they post you in and they lock it up, right? And there's like a group of they open the door and there's like a bunch of like those morgue drawers, right? And they basically plonk you in there, right? With a tag. And the next morning, it's refrigerated, obviously. It's not, so it's not going off. And the next morning, right, the people come in and la 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 la. Good morning, Mac. How was your day? Fine. They open. What have we got in the drawers today? Suicide, death, burning, drowning. And we went there and there was a smell, and she went, "Yeah, that's 2-week drowning." I went, as you can tell, he says, you can tell it goes everywhere. It's just like, I was going, what is that smell? So, you learn these things. And when you learn these things, they go in the book, because why not? Why not?
Does that answer your question?
I can actually make one question last quite a long time. I've had to, on occasion. Had some very shy audiences.
I think we've got time for one more question. Yes, then? How did you get into writing was the question.
Well, that's a very long, complicated question to ask at the end of the evening. Well, I like to write. I was writing when I was a kid. I mean, I was writing terrible stories, and my teachers thought I was never going to amount to anything because I couldn't spell. Ha ha ha! Because little did they know that this invention would come along called the spell checker. In fact, my career is entirely built on the back of spell checkers, by the way. I had one of the very first PCWs, which you won't know what that is, and it had a thing called LocoScript, and it actually had a spell checker, and my future was resolved at that point. I actually can spell much better because I got fed up of changing all this. You know when you do it on Word and you get that irritating little thing underneath the thing. I've actually learned to spell just so I won't get that irritating little bloody thing underneath. Except for Stephanopoulos, right? Who I always spell wrong. But fortunately, I have the correct spelling in the computer. So I wanted to do that, and I wanted to be a scriptwriter because I used to watch a lot of television and I needed an excuse. And like most writers, I started on the basis that I can do this. That's obviously really easy to do. So I started writing scripts, and that's how I ended up writing Doctor Who at quite a tender age. And when I wrote for Doctor Who, when you wrote a series for Doctor Who in those days, W.H. Allen, who did these novelizations of the books. You've got to remember this is before VHSs. So the novelizations were the only thing you had left after the series had been broadcast. And they would offer it to the writer of the script if they wanted to do it. And so basically someone paid me to write my first, it was actually 40,000 words, so it was my first novella. And once you've written 40,000 words, you know you can write 40,000 words. And once you've written 40,000 words, you can write 90,000 words. So it then just becomes a question of deciding whether you want to do it or not. So I'm good at it. And it's like playing the guitar. If you're good at it, you want to do it. And if you like doing it and you want to do it a lot, you try to find some way of monetizing it so that other people will pay you money so you can carry on doing it. But really the motive is that you can do it more and not have to do anything else. I mean, I'm an incredibly lazy man. I hate any kind of physical activity whatsoever, including washing up, cleaning, climbing, walking. And so therefore my ambition in life is the only thing I actually ever have to do is write novels and then old TV scripts. And then I can pay other people to do all the stuff I don't like walk the dog. You know, I mean, I want a dog, but I don't necessarily want to go out with it. So I don't know, it's very hard. How did you get into writing? When you've done it, it just feels inevitable. Like, oh, I was always heading, it was my destiny. But, you know, if I'd been good at piano playing, I would have been a piano player. Because, you know, it's more attractive skill at parties. Playing instruments. I noticed that. All the musicians got girls. I got much. Excuse me, wait there, I'll write you a novel, be back in 6 months. You know?
For any writers in the room, I co-present a podcast called The Bestseller Experiment, which is aimed at writers, at any level, if you're just starting out. And by far, and we've had Bryan Cranston on, Michael Connolly, Joanne Harris, all sorts of people, but by far, our listeners' favourite episode is with this man, which if you just Google Bestseller Experiment, Ben Aaronovitch Bollocking, you will find him yelling at us.
You want to know what procrastination is? 55,000 word outline. Unless your novel is 250,000 words long, right? You are doing something wrong.
It's early days yet.
And it actually changed the way I write. It was one of the pivotal points in my writing career.
Proud moment for
you. Yeah. So it really did change things. So I think that's all the time we've got for questions. We're going to have some signing stuff now. But ladies and gentlemen, please, before we settle that up, show your appreciation for Mr. Ben Aaronovitch.
cabinet. He was the first one because he said that, and I said you've got to write that on the wall. So you can be where you want. You can be Kate Atkinson, Max Hastings.
I'm at the writing wall.
Wilson, fantastic.
I think he still is, but it's essentially a household.
Oh, I just thought of something. Oh well. Never mind.
Could you write? Do you mind writing your name as well?
I've written my name.
No, but you like. How can I say this without being rude? Yes, cursively. Otherwise, I'll have to get my rubber stamps out.
I wonder why Kate Atkinson was like that.
Yeah.